All right, I just approved Doug again for speaker. Can you test your mic?
Hey guys, how you doing?
There's that beautiful voice.
Thanks. I was trying to do this in a headset and that didn't work. Okay. Happy to be here.
Awesome.
The headset, Douglas, will work if you, is it a Bluetooth headset? You need to disconnect, leave the Twitter spaces, then come back because you need to have the headset connected before you join. I just had to do that, so I just had to leave.
I appreciate it. I'm just going to go with what I got right now and move to a quieter part of the house.
Sounds good.
All right, so I guess let's just kick this off with the very basics. I see a lot of familiar faces in the audience, but we're going to approach this a little bit as if you haven't been following over the last, what has it been, over 6 months since the coalition formed and started working towards this rebranding process. So the first question is pretty open-ended. Either of you guys can jump in, and the question is, like, what is Antelope? Obviously, it's a fork and a rebrand of EOSIO, but what is Antelope? And why did you personally, or your chain, why did you find it, why was it necessary?
You know, Yves started it all. Why don't you take it, Yves?
Sure. I mean, in order to, I think, explain what is Antelope or why it was needed, I think we really need to go back as well to the origins of the coalition and how that formed, because it really is kind of the foundation of the bed towards what then Antelope ended up being, because the Antelope is more than just one chain, right? It's really the 4 chains coming together, creating this brand and creating this vision. So the idea with the coalition originally, the idea was as an extra working group. So EOS went and created 4 working groups last year, the 4 original blue papers and the working groups associated to them. And really, at the time, the coalition was called EOSIO Plus, and it was the 5th working group. And fast forwarding to that, we know now who the coalition members were, but at the time we really didn't know how this would come about. We didn't know who would be interested. We didn't even know what this would be. So when I say this, I mean, how would we work together? What would we be working on? What would we have a brand around that? Would we have an entity around that? What would we be doing day to day? Would we have staff? Would we have an actual entity or whatnot, like an actual something more tangible? And so that at the very beginning, it was all just a completely blank slate. And 7 chains originally got together, started participating in discussions, which ultimately led to the final 4 and the current coalition members, so Telos, UX, Wax, and EOS. And throughout that process, one thing that became very clear to everybody, and that we knew as EOS, and I think Telos knew as Telos, and Wax knew as Wax, and UX knew as UX, that the legacy EOSIO code base was extremely powerful. It's what united us, but it came with a lot of branding baggage and a lot of negative branding baggage associated to it. So one of the first things that we started discussing, that we'd all internally been discussing within our respective communities, was how do we move away from that? How do we potentially turn something that is seen by the greater market, and largely to an extent in the internal markets as well, in our internal communities, seen something as very negative, when in fact a big part of it is actually very positive. It's quite strong. It's the product behind that software stack. And one of the problems with that is that in EOS's case anyways, everything came back to EOS. So when you were talking about EOS, were you talking about the coin? Were you talking about the chain? Were you talking about the software? Were you talking about the network? Like, which one are you talking about? Because the naming was pretty bad. In other people's cases, from what I heard, was they were even avoiding talking about EOSIO because of that EOS branding. So how can you somehow showcase that your underlying tech stack is extremely strong without necessarily mentioning the words? And so, those discussions happened very, very early on within the coalition, and it was quite apparent that we all agreed that a rebrand of the software stack would not only be beneficial to move away from the negative associated to it, but also, and I think more importantly, an opportunity for us as a new team, or as a as a cohort of 4 completely decentralized, completely separate entities, to work on a very tangible project and create an image and a brand and values and a mission and philosophies around who are we, what is this question. So that branding became way more than just a rename of the software stack. And maybe I'll let Douglas take it from here, because he was key in those discussions, and he was in that subgroup that essentially led this this initiative along myself, Justin, who I believe is also on the chat, Justin from Infinity Block on Telos and the TCD, or sorry, the Telos Foundation, and Aaron Cox from Greymass. But maybe Douglas, you want to pick it up from here?
Yeah, thanks, Yves. Actually, I think that's a great start. There was, like Yves said, there was no plan. There was not that there was no plan. There was no form perceived on this group. We didn't know who the members would be. We didn't. There's a lot we didn't know. And so once we got over that hump, we were able to think about not just who we aren't in the old branding, but very much who we are. What do we stand for? And each of the individual things had their own identity, but Antelope was not just going to be an amalgam of those. There were going to be certain areas of similarity, and then there were going to be things that didn't fit, right? So we had to decide, or just explore what those things were. And there was we knew that we needed to have a branding section. What was going on, what exactly was going to comprise the led that. He went and contracted and dealt interfaced business on a business level with Word Studios, who is the branding firm we used. And then yes, from there on we did a more 2 or 3 times weekly call at first with Word, trying to understand pretty much everything. People think, oh, okay, well, it's the name and the logo, right? But really the more important things are who are we really trying to attract, who are we trying to be, what's important, what are we conveying, what is and isn't within the scope of this. And just really, it was actually a fantastic opportunity to really do a deep dive, because this was a new group. And so I think through the exploration of that, we were able to actually come together a lot more. This whole process was something where we started out, I believe, at the most sort of competitive layer or point on that slider of between competitive and cooperative. And through this process, and all of us saying, hey, this is what we think we should be, and other people saying, oh yeah, we think that too, we discovered in what we're looking for and what we're trying to be, that there were way more alignments than we had originally thought of, and also more than we were happy about that. There's a lot of things that we could work on together. And it actually, through this process of saying who we are, who are our customers, who are we serving, how are we serving them, what do we stand for, those questions, we all sort of contemplated where our individual chains led up, and where Antelope was pick things up. And so I think it was a great process. We, just in technical basis, we started out working, talking about very basically about what we were trying to be, what audiences we were trying to attract. And it was, and from there we moved into things like, what associations would we want people to have. One of my earliest things, I will say, was every single thing we do needs to be the opposite of what Block One did, right? Like if since I feel they did practically everything wrong. The place I suggested we start was just like, what did Block One do and that we didn't like, which is almost everything, and what should we do? Like, and that had to do with one of our core values is transparency and openness, right? We talk about, we want to share, and we are sharing so much more than Block One ever actually shared, and we want to be open to people's feedback, and there's been some of that, and there will be more as we move forward. Obviously, you can't do a branding exercise and keep everything silent while you're, and do that with pure openness when it's a messy process, and also people are going to go in and snake the URLs and things that you're considering from you. So we had to do that in a sort of in a closed door way, but everything else we expect to be really transparent. And so we shared those things, but we also shared practical things, like it's a place you build, it's a forge for new chains, it's and through these things, I got to tip my hat to Word. They did an amazing job at like really remembering everything we said from conversation to conversation, so that towards the end, I think Eve and I were both pleasantly surprised that things in the final branding, some of those things look back to subjects we had discussed 2 months before, and probably not since, but they held on to that, and they were really a good facilitator and creative partner in that. So eventually, you just get down to, okay, the committee of 4 of us worked on answering lots of questions, like what's, again, and we discovered things like, well, we really want to appeal to developers who are not in blockchain at all, right? We want to, because that's a huge growth market for us. How do we appear more friendly and open and easy to them? That's something that that I think mostly people have been fighting for existing blockchain developers, right? So reaching out to people and companies who currently don't have any intention of immediately moving into the Web3 space, but may have to very soon, within the next year or 2 years or whatever. That's a huge growth area for us, and a place where we can leapfrog what other chains are or groups of chains have done. So we discovered a lot. It was a super great process. It was a very arduous process, to be honest. It took a lot of time, but I really enjoyed it. And to be honest, it made me want to hire these guys for Telos because it's just such a great process to go through. Yeah, I think that I think that kind of covers the 4 or 5 months. Actually, we started this, didn't we? We started this even before
Yeah.
we
I think we started
had,
this in February, so it's 6
yeah,
months.
yeah, it's been 6 months. Yeah.
Is the first thing that as a coalition we agreed that we would get on was that process, because it was more than just a rebranding. It was also, as a group, determining who we were. And that's really
Right.
what Antelope is. It's the result of who the coalition is at this stage, pretty much where we come from, where we're going. That's what is embodied within Antelope, and everything you see attached to Antelope. So all the brand messaging, the visuals, basically everything attached to that is, so I think that that's at the highest level. The answer is that's what Antelope is. It's the embodiment of the coalition coming together, where they come from, where they're going.
Yeah, and it's a product of everybody working together in a open and positive way. It was, I really have come to like everybody on the that I'm talking, that's joined the coalition. I see the work they're doing. I hope it's mutual. And so there's been a lot of camaraderie and shared goal and achievement amongst us, and that that can only help. I think one of the things that was unfortunate to me, like in how the stories were picked up, is many of the journalists are looking at this and saying, okay, the ENF, this is basically ENF, and all these other guys are coming together kind of under that umbrella. And and for me, it's like, no, actually, this is very much, everyone is contributing. It really is a coalition. It's not something. I mean, ENF started it, but that's not how it really grew. And I'm not mad at about that. I'm not upset about that really, because, oh gosh, people aren't mentioning Telos or UX or Wax, it's more the fact that it just doesn't reflect the reality. And I think in time, people will come to see that, oh, okay, yeah, it really is a coalition of of super friends, who are coming together and making something work that didn't work before, and that probably no single chain would have been able to pull together in quite this way. So I think it's unfortunate that story hasn't come across yet, but I know that in time it will, because we're just going to keep pushing that message, and when people understand that, I think it'll be much stronger for everyone, right?
Yeah.
To understand that this is something that lets it go up against Cosmos and Polkadot and things like that are seen as chains of chain, beyond just a chain, right? They're a built-in ecosystem where anyone can deploy on them, and there's already a set of great tools. And as more people deploy on them, more chains deploy, it has the potential to strengthen everything. And so that is an important part of our story that hasn't come across yet, but will.
And that's embodied in the, so if you look at the logo, and so if we start talking about even more specifically about the branding itself, so what is Antelope? And if you look at the logo in relation to what Douglas was just talking about, there are 4 interlocking horns. Those are the 4 original founding members of the coalition. And when you look at those horns and how they're positioned, they're moving forward. They're also open, so they're not closed horns. They're not. If you look at the circles themselves, they're not closed. They're not touching, right? Because they're open. Because at some point, this will be more than 4 chains. So we also wanted to position Antelope so that it's open, it's transparent. Everything we've been doing so far has been open and transparent. I mean, for those who really want to spend the time, we've been publishing the coalition calls now for 6 months, 7 months, every single one. There's 2, 3, 4 hours per week of videos for this. So you even find that those values. So when we go back to kind of the brand messaging and the values, you find that in the logo itself. You find the kind of the symbol of the infinity within when you look at the logo and what that represents. The horns interlocking, but kind of moving forward because we're leaping ahead. We're moving forward. We're heading into the future. All of those components, and I guess maybe Douglas, you want to talk a little bit about that, like not just the values that we talked about earlier, how they're represented visually in what comes about in antelope. And even antelopes, people have been saying, antelopes typically are very strong in herds. It's the herd. It's the fact that there's more than one. It's the fact that when they band together, they're unstoppable, that they've survived through time. So antelope as a species has been, first of all, there are tons of different species of antelopes. I don't recall the number. There's something like 78 or even more than that. But as a species or as an animal, is quite resilient. So if you take one out single-handedly, maybe that's one thing. But when you look at them as a team, as in this case, the 4 of us, and more ideally in the future, is that unstoppable, resilient, agility, speed, everything that embodies.
Right, and if you watched my my video that came out yesterday, that was sort of a teaser for this discussion, you will have heard this already, but the antelope is extremely successful. At one point, there was some concern. It's like, yeah, but lions eat antelopes. But yeah, but antelopes are hugely successful. They're a great variety of shapes. There are a great variety of ecological niches that they fit into, and it is a very, it really represents what we're trying to do, because there is flexibility, right? If you have to fit into one, economic niche, then you're going to have these features, and that's totally open to you. And a chain doing something different with attracting a different audience or feeding a different need they are going to have a very different form, and yet they'll all be, just like sables and elands and dik-diks and wildebeest are all very different in many ways, and they are all antelopes, right? And so, yes, there are most antelopes do gain power from herds. They're very strong. They have evolved to fit into very successfully to fit into these different niches. They there's not there's they're able to thrive in many different environments. So just the association with the actual clade of animals that are antelopes, that's there's a lot of symbolism imbued in that. There's also there's so much in the icon, right? In addition, it's linked chains. If you look at it, it feels like there's a forward motion to it, especially if you kind of at smaller sizes where you're kind of squinting at a little bit. It looks like a chain moving into the future. There are pieces of sort of a yin yang idea in there where an infinite loop, infinite um, uh, movement of different types of energies, right? And so and there's even more things that as I recall we talked about. It's just a symbolism. It's just a symbol. The logo type itself is something that has a lot of meaning imbued in it, and people will see that along the way, and they may see things that we didn't initially see, but they're probably still in there. The main thing is that we all like is there's a lot you could take from this brand, and it's all seemed very positive things. All the ones we thought of were positive associations that we wanted people to think about us. But also it was extremely in other terms, it was just extremely different from what went before. If we had come out with something that was a faceted version of like a slightly different chestahedron, but this one had or a dodecahedron or any kind of hedron, we would have people would have seen this as a continuation of the past, and we really wanted to say this is brand new. This is pay attention. And one of the things I really wanted was also to have this be the type of name that was not easily identified with just blockchain or just I didn't want it to be just anything. I wanted it to be out there and big and bold and a word that people knew but did not have preconceived conceptions about, so that we would be able to build those conceptions as we move forward, and showed that we are going to be transparent and open and productive and positive and build the synergies between us. So in my mind, it fits together very well with Apple, Alphabet, Amazon, and Antelope. Those types of names that are just. I wanted us to express that to everybody, that this is our vision for where this technology is going to go. Not that it's going to be a single large company, but that it's going to be a single large technology provider that becomes more and more ubiquitous for the way people interface with each other and computers and the world.
And part of this branding process, I think it's important to note that it's more than when you choose a name and when you choose a brand, it's more than just the name. So you also need to take things into consideration that perhaps don't come to mind right away, like the domain. Are domains available? What about trademarks? Is it something that can be trademarked? What about SEO? Will you be able to actually leverage this name and carve your place in the market? So Douglas just mentioned right now this idea that when you hear of Antelope, you don't think of blockchain. That's an advantage because then it stands out. So then what you do is then alongside that name, the brand messaging that you attach to it may be more, might have a little bit more inclination to highlight the fact that it's a blockchain, or that is associated to blockchain and that's in the IT space, because the name itself doesn't invoke that. And that's kind of what we see in the logo as well, right? So the logo has the horns, but it clearly also has, like Douglas mentioned, locked chains together. So, right, the blockchain. And so you can come and complement these things in order to get the pieces that are perhaps missing in one of the visual identities. You complement that through another piece of the brand messaging. But it's those things like trademark, like domain, like socials, all of these things that aren't really apparent when you start going down the route of rebranding, that are actually really key in determining ultimately what you're going to end up settling on. And you have a lot of leeway in this. One of the other things I think that's important is that, like Douglas mentioned, you mentioned the Apple alphabet, Amazon, and the fact that it starts with an A is very powerful for multiple reasons.
Yeah, it's not an accident. And yes, one of the more frustrating things in the process is the really large number of constraints put on you by, all the other good names are taken. There are a lot of things we thought of that seemed great, but as we go down those roads and explore those avenues, we discover, oh well, this is already associated with this. We want something clean of associations. I'm actually shocked at how great a potential branding we were able to come up with, in my opinion. With so many things taken, and we looked at what it was out there and what was available. Justin Guidici, he's got kind of like a four-leaf clover in his pocket or something when it comes to URLs, because he was back in the Telos days. He was able to get us telos.net for $2,000, and I was like, oh my god, I can't believe anything like that with an original top level domain is available. He was also able to get us Antelope.io, and he was really great in leading that negotiation and getting that down, and it was, he got it down to like $22,000. This is another thing, by the way. One of our brand identities is not one of the major ones, but what we found is like there's a certain frugality to who we are. Antelopes, almost all the antelopes you see are lean, right? They're these are not big lumbering creatures. These are fast. They don't expend they don't expend energy on nothing. They and like that, we had to be realistic about what we could get, right? We didn't want, like, we voted in an $8 million a year budget, and we're actually allocating more than that, but in the first year already. But just because we didn't want to spend what was it, $30 million on voice.com and then abandon it. We wanted to use something we felt we were truly going to use and be able to afford without somebody raking us over the coals, because that could all be going to developers or any other better purpose than just buying a big expensive name, right? So that availability was great. It's amazing how these things sometimes align, and as you go through a process, I'm sure anyone who's gone through big hairy processes before knows that it's just like at points it feels like there's a lot stacked against you, but if you're lucky and you work through it, and you're creative and you bring a lot of a lot of energy to it, in the end, sometimes it works out, and I think it worked out incredibly well for us. I feel really fortunate.
So we've talked a lot about the branding. I think everyone's excited about that, but I think the coalition is also an exciting thing to touch upon. And Doug, you hit it earlier when you said when the coalition began, the initial roadmap was kind of, let's do the opposite of everything Block One did. So we have open conversations, we have inclusive conversations, we take feedback from the community, we publish a public roadmap. As part of that roadmap, we publish RFPs to allow anyone to bid on the work being contracted out through the coalition. Do any
Yeah.
of you want to touch on the priorities and the features and that RFP process and why we went with the RFP process for the coalition?
Yeah, I'll hand it over to Yves in a minute, but this is another area where, for one thing, we were able to work together a lot. You know, there were areas, there were, you know, different team members internally pick up different pieces, and that's sort of an expression of what people are, you know, of what people, you know, how we're all working together, how it's not just one sort of monolithic thing that others just join, but in fact from the inside, and we generally don't surface this just because we think people aren't that interested, but there's no secret about it. You know, we all, like, you know, wax brings things to the party. Um, UX is doing fantastic development. We were really early on, when we were trying to figure out who we really thought were going to be good contributors and who weren't. You know, who based on the 3 months that we'd already done of working together, who was demonstrating that they're, you know, who that they had the interest in being a contributor in all ways versus just sort of showing up, and this was, you know, seeing if this process and was going to be good for them, and ultimately deciding that it probably wasn't. That became pretty apparent, but one of the ones that I was less familiar with was UX, and once Yves actually said to me, we were trying to talk about this, and early on there was a bit of challenge when this first started out, who was, you know, how we were going to get it over the hump of actually turning it into a coalition. And Yves, you know, told me, hey, we really want UX in, because even though they're a smaller partner, they have really smart guys that have really good tech, and we think they can be contributors. Telos and EOS were obviously large contributors pretty much from the beginning, so it's easy to see how those fit. I think that with the work that we're doing, all of it based off the at least much of it at this point based off the blue papers that ENF had funded and put out, and that had become a really great community opportunity for the community to come together and go and say, yeah, these are the types of things we're going to fund. These are the kind of things we think are important technically. We were able to move off of those, and there was a general consensus that if they wanted, that the groups that had authored those would get the right of first bid, and some did and some didn't. And to be honest, there's many of these things have few people who can easily pull them off, right? So it's not what we're trying to do. That's one of the things that we're trying to do, is be able to build a good process that more developers can say, okay, we see how this is open, and it could be in our interest to bid on these, right? Because we have to expand the amount of engineers who are proficient in building Antelope tech. That was actually one of the secret things that really drove, I think, Yves and I and several others together in our understanding that there's a limited number of people to do this, and they were going to leave the community, and they're going to go on to something else because they're very talented, and unless we grabbed them and also brought new people in to learn from them and, you know, get professional development, then there weren't going to be any experts in this anymore, and that was the greatest danger, I thought. So and Yves and I were scarily aligned in a lot of these things. But what we're trying to do now is put out a way that we can support those teams that are building, so they can have a clear way to basically save the developers and keep them in the ecosystem, while bringing more in. And what we don't want it to be is a closed group where if you're not part of Antelope, you don't get to bid on these things, or you're never going to get anything. That's not at all what we want. It just so happens that the organizations right now that have these people who can do the work are those that went out and have been doing it all along, or have gone out and tried to engage these developers. And then early on, there was a certain amount of us all kind of like trying to get these people, and now we don't have to bid against each other or anything like that, because they all fit within the ecosystem. I've rambled a bit, so Yves, why don't you fill in what I've in my defense, I ramble because it's a big topic. And one thing leads to another, and it's hard to discuss some parts of it without being reminded of other priorities that came to the fore and haven't been discussed at all, and I think are worthy of discussion, right? Like the keeping avoiding a brain drain from the Antelope space, things like that.
To talk about the RFP process, Zach, that you mentioned, the process is really what we're trying to focus on. So we knew, just like Douglas was saying right now, we knew that the likelihood is that in the short term, the majority of the people that will be able to bid on some of these items are quite limited. That they're not, they're far few in between. However, what we wanted to ensure, and this is very important for us, is that we don't fall into a space long-term where the amount of teams that potentially can develop at the protocol level are so limited that they're really centralized in one or two teams, because that's historically where we come from, right? There was really only one entity that was permitted to merge PRs because they were the controllers of the repo. When people have tried historically to submit PRs, they were never merged. When people were submitting issues, then they were never taken care of. We wanted to ensure that we start creating a process, regardless of knowing that in the short term, it would likely be the same people that would be applying, but to have the process out there, be made public, refine the process so that in the future, they're very much, and currently we're already seeing it right now, it opens up the doors to anybody and everybody with any competency to be able to build on items that we deem priority. And then outside of that, even if items aren't deemed priority, what we've seen as well with the coalition, which is outside of the RFP process, let's say, is that we've been holding these weekly calls where people can submit issues. If they're capable, then they can submit PRs, they get reviewed, there's back and forth. We've seen some already been merged. If they're not capable of submitting PRs because it requires a certain technical skill set, they can submit issues. Those issues get picked up by the current protocol engineers, and then they get worked on, and then that gets implemented in there. Just to give an idea, when we first took over the code base, there was something like 2,650 outstanding issues that had been piling up over years. We closed every single one of them. And during that process of closing all of them, what happened is a lot of these people that were looking at the code base and seeing issues, but that over a period of time stopped submitting them because nobody was dealing with them. So why would you do that? We started seeing an influx of people starting reviewing code again and submitting more issues again, and then people getting engaged in this process. So what Douglas is talking about right now of opening up the door so that we can have more people come back to and new people come to, because Douglas also mentioned earlier something is very important, that Antelope branding is not just about looking in our own sandbox and in our own backyard for developers, but also creating something that will invite Web 2 developers to come to the Web3 space, creating that environment, that brand in that space for them to be inviting, so that we can have more and more people contributing to this core code stack, having multiple ways to contribute, whether it be just an issue, whether it be PR, whether it be formal RFP process, having all of those different buckets and those rails set up early on, the process being set up, the processes being set up really early on, and being able to refine on those processes so that ultimately, once there's an influx of people, once at some point we have more priorities than we can handle, and ideally we have enough funds that we could actually undertake multiple priorities all at once, all in parallel, that the underlying fundamentals are there to accommodate and scale that process. And that's really what we focused on with the RFP process as well. Even just something simple like getting the templates in place, getting the what are we looking for? How are we going to be asking? Because one thing we saw historically is as well is that you can commission work, but the skill set of writing out what it is you're looking for is also very particular. Because if you don't really properly communicate what it is you want somebody to do, what you're going to get at the outcome is not necessarily what you wanted in the first place. And we saw that, for example, with the bounty for EVM that was given a few years back. Ultimately, the person that submitted and won did tremendous work. They filled out the bounty. They did the bounty very well. What we were left with is kind of a half product, though. It's not really EVM compatible, right? So Telos went off on its own and ended up closing that gap. EOS is now closing that gap. But that really stems from really a poor RFP process or a poor process in the beginning, whereby what you ultimately wanted is not necessarily what you got. What you got is what you asked for. And so defining that process as well as a coalition of what do we want and how do we put pen to paper so that what we get is what we want, not what we asked for. And really that's what we've been focusing on with the RFP process as well, is refining that skill set, refining how we define the technical requirements, the business requirements, so that whatever we get, whatever we pay for, we deem that is the priority and that we pay for as a coalition, ultimately we're satisfied with it. And that process also being laid out in a way that really ensures that, how can I say this, that we don't necessarily pay upfront and then potentially we don't have any oversight over the process, or that the incentives aren't aligned. So also defining it in a way where it's milestone based, where you pay over time for components that are done, but if the process ends up not working out, or the vendor which you're working ultimately not works out, that you at least only paid for what you got, and that there's a maintenance package into that, and that everybody has a chance to review, and that the people that are the specific subject matter experts for that particular thing also have a say. All of this we're creating from scratch. And it's not that those processes don't exist outside of Antelope and outside of the blockchain space, they do. So it's going out and leveraging things that already exist, that are already standard, that are already quite common in the industry, bring that knowledge in and those processes in within Antelope as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that hasn't been our way, right? Because in the past, it was developer groups would work on these things internally. So if they needed to do course corrections, they would they would be working in the process. But when you set it up for an RFP, you're not necessarily going to have that. So you have to be very specific up front. And I view, so Yves and I and others, we've been working with groups not only to address the immediate needs, but I think in the things that I've been working on with you, Yves, I mean, our goals has been to create, if we have a specific contract to negotiate or things like that, that we've been assigned, we aren't trying to just do that contract. What I think what's really great about this process is that we say, okay, well, what should the process, from this and other projects we've worked on, what are the commonalities? What are the points that have, that we should standardize, right? What are those? And then let's apply that standard to this contract and see how that works out. It's the same for the the creation of the agreement and the list of deliverables and the list of payments and things like that. By creating these as processes that are then reproducible as opposed to a bunch of one-offs, we make this easier in the future. We take a lot of the work that could have happened on each individual proposal in the future, and we say, no, let's standardize these so that we educate people who are going to apply, what rates we're comfortable taking under general conditions, what timelines about. It would be terrible. Some of the first ones we have going, the really big sort of omnibus development we have is I believe an 18 months long process before we really get to the end. I hate for us to get to the end of that and have it not be what we wanted. But it also means, so I would say, based on what Yves said about the EVM process, right? I have a slightly different view. I actually think it's not that Block One wanted something specific and didn't get it. I think they didn't specify. They did within themselves. They didn't really understand what they wanted. I actually think it was just something. I think it was just something they did for bragging rights. Didn't really care. They never put anything else behind it. And when we looked at what was actually there, it was not designed to be a general EVM. It was designed to run, one or two or three contracts, but not allow other people to deploy things. So there was and I think that just came from the fact that really they didn't actually care. They just wanted some bragging rights over Ethereum, or to try it that and that's reflected in the fact they didn't follow through. So that's what we don't want, right? That's another example of what we wouldn't want to have is put something out there just for a short-term promotional purpose when it had the capacity to be a really fantastic and important technology. The work that we did at Telos for Telos EVM, that changes how people interact with the underlying blockchain and who can, right? By taking a set of tools that people are very comfortable using and a very large set of smart contracts and other smart contracts and apps, with front ends and all those things, and applying them onto our chains, right, where they look familiar and people know people are used to it. And EOS will be there soon with Trust EVM. It's going to open up the ability to have people interact and greatly open up the audience for us of users. But that wasn't what it was intended for. So it's not just clearly conveying what you want and having a good set of standards. It's also internally just as important is to understand what you really do need. And that's a place where it's a strength to have 4 chains or more in the future, because we look beyond what any one chain's priorities are, and by polling everybody, and we're going to be doing this quarterly, reevaluating our priority list without just jumping from one thing to the next, but we're going to regularly reevaluate, are the priorities we had before, are they still our priorities? That makes it more universal to other people going on than anything that if just Wax was doing it, then they would want to solve a certain set of issues that are very that are challenging them right now. If Telos did it, we'd want to do some different sets of features. Same with EOS and UX. So by working together internally, making a good understanding of what this should be and debating it and refining it, we're keeping Antelope very universal. And I think that's important. And I want to say, there's 4 chains that are involved, but we'd be remiss in not mentioning the participation of Gray Mass. Even though they don't have a vote, Aaron Cox is there all the time He's working on these processes with us. He's bringing his experience as a developer on all of these chains, I believe, and that's actually also invaluable. And it expresses. So I really want to tip my hat to him, and people should understand that Graymass has been like sort of a fifth member of this in important ways. So and we're open to that. Like I think that anyone ultimately who wants to come in and say, hey, we want to make a real contribution, not just, we accept that we're not going to have a say, but we want to make a contribution, and we plan to be responding to RFPs, and so we'd like to have some access. We're open to that. We're not open to adding a lot of chatter that's going to not be productive, but there are certain ecosystem players that are that would be very welcome there if their real goal is what our goal is just to make this all work. But together we create a clear plan within ourselves. We have a RFP process that expresses that plan in a very distinct way that we can come back in 6 months or whatever when these things are delivered, and we already know, we have a very clear description of what each deliverable is. The thing we're moving to lately is or just decided was that we're going to have the approvers for each milestone are going to be, and even sub project within a milestone are going to be established at the beginning, so everyone knows who has sign off. And one of the harder things one of the problems I had when I was at Microsoft working for them was when you didn't know who was the actual signer or who was going to actually have approval. And then they became very clear about that, which was helpful. And I think so that's a process that I hate to say that we're taking anything from how Microsoft did business, but having an approval process, knowing who that was from the get-go, and having those two people or more have reputational need to stay engaged and only approve things that are worth approving. That's another process. Having this standardizing pricing for certain developers, but also actually keeping, and within all of that, keeping the process so as simple as possible, right? So one of the things we're really trying to do is not as documenting everything important, but also leaving certain things open, so it's not like you're, so there's enough freedom, and so there's certain steps along the way that probably aren't important to get super granular on, in terms of how the contractor works and things like that. And so that's also important, like not fixating on just every single detail, but really trying to prioritize the important details.
We're running up on an hour. Is there anyone from the audience that wants to raise their hand? We could take maybe a couple of questions if anyone has any. I know there's been some connection issues this whole time, so apologies for that. I don't know what's up with Twitter Spaces today. Not seeing any hands. All right, so I guess running up on an hour, I guess we could start to wrap things up. This won't be the last Twitter Spaces, and hopefully the next ones won't have all of the disconnecting issues. So maybe you could each answer the same question, but what can we expect from Antelope over the next few months, and what are you personally most excited about?
I can give it a go at first. So, for me, we're on the cusp right now of finalizing the approvals for the SDKs, as well as faster finality and IBC. And those three priorities that were laid out at the onset as our top priorities have now gone through the whole gauntlet of approval process, of RFPs, of breaking it down to milestones, finance, the financial components to it, all of the technical requirements, the business requirements, we're on the cusp of them finally being able to actually start the work. And to me, those are incredible pieces of or incredible functions that will be added to Antelope that will just take Antelope to the next level. I mean, we're from the SDK's point of view, that is all about improving UX. It's all about improving the facilitation to interact with Antelope, which is very much needed. I often say that dealing with Antelope is kind of like playing a video game where the only option you have is playing on hard, that there's no easy or medium. It's only hard or hardcore. And so SDKs will go a long way to closing that gap. And then on the faster finality IBC front, both of them have so much, I mean, they have tremendous synergies together. They really bring Antelope to, you know, a new level of performance. Like Antelope is already the most performant software stack out there, blockchain framework out there. And with IBC and faster finality, that just brings that up to a whole new level, unseen level, right? So we have that performance already, we have that reliability already, and now it's a massive upgrade. So I'm very, very much excited about those three priorities being finally started, worked on, and being deployed over the coming months.
Yeah, I agree, Yves. All of those things are just really exciting. I think that as you go down the rabbit hole of each one of them and figure out what they mean and how they can be used, especially then using them together, things like IBC and fast finality together across chains, right? Having smart contract platforms that are in multiple languages, that the ability for developers, and even more, by the way, I believe we'll be opening up more smart contract languages, because the more languages you have, the more developers you can attract easily, right? So it's less intimidating to have to learn an entirely new programming language. I see this as finally restarting the development that should have been going on all along, right? EOS, Antelope, sorry, bad old habit. Antelope, when we started out, like we had a huge lead. Not, I mean, yes, we are still. If you look at the performance charts, we are still the fastest and highest capacity. But in many areas, the gap between us and others has narrowed pretty significantly. And had we not picked up development and really run with it in a big way, that would have continued, and where we were in danger of losing that lead. But with what we've approved so far, you're going to see this is more than 2 years of development that should have been happening all along. It's a great opportunity to pick what's really important. These, by the way, these are all things that were promised, you know, in the white paper, right? And there's never delivered. And had we only delivered these things, we'd be in a very, very different situation right now. I think all the chains. Well, there might not ever have been a Telos if they had delivered on a lot of the things that they had promised. But we're doing it now. You know, you can't go back in time. We're doing it now, and my excitement for the things that our technology could be is really growing. And I think that as more people look into it, it's going to change the script of what EOSIO had been to what Antelope is going to be and is. I think it'll bring in a lot more developers. I think it'll cause all those people who had a negative association with the brand before to give it a new look, not because the brand is different and the name is different, but because our actions are also very different. And so I see that as we roll out new software, you know, the Leap release adds a lot of really exciting things that we're going to get right away. Starting, you know, most of the chains will probably go in September. to that hard fork, that those add a lot, and people will start to see those as we bring out easier, easier interfaces that any of the chains can use if they want, or we can even use them together as the way like Atomic Wallet is for some of the Cosmos chains. People will see that we are indeed walking the walk. I think that's what we have to deliver now, but I know we will, because we're already doing it. People just aren't aware of it, and we're going to continue to that. So that's exciting to me, and I think that people will see that this really is a whole new, the new boss is not the same as the old boss. This really is a whole new group and a new philosophy and a new set of features and possibilities and toolings. This should have been there all along, but now they're really going to be there, and people will recapture the excitement about what we were always supposed to be.
Well said. Yeah, Yves dropped off. He can't connect back in. We're having this space had a lot of connection issues. So I guess
that's the universe telling us to wrap it up.
That is the universe telling us to wrap it up. So this won't be the last one. We'll make sure we'll have more time to prepare for the next one. We'll bring Wax and UX Network, have some more representation for the next one, and we'll have probably more about than just the rebrand, because the work never ends. So
right. Part of our transparency is that and openness is that we want to be doing these things more regularly. We want to be there for the community. But we also want to hear from you guys. So for the next one, we'll do our homework, but you guys can do your homework and have some great questions, because we know they're out there. So, and we want to answer them. So I look forward to that one.
Yeah, that was just a timing thing. Usually you promote a Spaces event with more than, what would we have, less than 20, well, I guess with the earlier, it was like 24 hours notice, because we didn't want to give the name away with the Spaces. So next time we'll have a little bit of lead time.
Yep.
We'll do kind of like an AMA. We'll take a bunch of questions from all our different communities, and I think hopefully we won't have the connection issues. But thanks everyone for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
Thanks everybody.